This is Unearthing Eden, a podcast hosted by two witches where we will primarily be discussing all things witchy and metaphysical. Welcome to our garden. So, this week's episode is on Apollo. I'm going to get into his history, the origins of Apollo, his associations, and historically how he was worked with. So, Apollo was born as a twin to Artemis, as a lot of people already know. They're both very heavily associated with archery, wildness, but they do have a sort of duality to them, whereas Artemis is more so associated with the moon and Apollo is more so associated with the sun and light in general. So their mother was a Titan named Leto, and their father was Zeus. Leto became pregnant with the twins, and Hera was basically trying to make it as complicated as possible for her to be able to give birth. So she started off basically by keeping Eileithyia, which is a goddess of childbirth. Eileithyia has to be present for somebody to be able to give birth. So by keeping her away from Leto, it was basically preventing her from having these babies. She was just continuously pregnant. And then she, as well as that, she cursed Leto to not be able to give birth on land. So anywhere in the world, she cannot give birth as long as she is on land. Now, this basically kept her for about 9 days overdue with these twins. She was wandering around and very miserable. Now, there's two versions of how she found the island of Delos, which is where she ultimately gave birth to the twins. One of the stories say Iris, the rainbow goddess, she's also a messenger goddess, brought Leto to the island of Delos, where she was able to give birth because the island is moving. It's not technically connected to land, so it was kind of a way around the curse. Another one is Leto discovers the island herself, and Zeus had Poseidon anchor the island so that it can be stable, so that she would be able to get on it and get away from Hera, essentially. When she was finally able to give birth to the twins, Artemis was said to have come first, and there is one where Eileithyia met them and assisted in Artemis's birth, and another version where Artemis assisted in her own birth. And immediately upon Artemis being born, she assisted her mother with the birth of her brother Apollo. So immediately upon their birth, they're both grown adults. They are beloved by the other deities. They're giving gifts to these twins. They are praising them. And obviously Hera's not too happy about this because it kind of put a damper in her plans to torture Leto a little bit longer. She sent a python after Leto as well. Some cases say that she sent the python after the birth of Artemis and Apollo to attack or harm them and Leto. And then in other cases, Leto was escaping the python who was continuously harassing her throughout her pregnancy, which both can be true at the same time anyways. So onto the python, which is very significant to Apollo's story. He is actually known as Pantheon after killing the serpent who was harassing his mother. Mind you, these two deities were very protective over their mother. They were known to stand up for her because they knew that their mother was very mistreated during her pregnancy because of who their father is. So, as I said, Hera sent this python, which could also be seen as a dragon in some cases, not necessarily a snake figure. And Apollo defeated this python, and it was both to avenge his mother as well as to take over his territory. So after killing the python, this can either be seen as a celebration or a punishment. It's not really clear which it is, but they actually created games called the Pythian Games. It was so popular. It was very much like the Olympics, where it was just a game of like strength and athletics, and they would do this every 4 years. And it could be he had to host these games as a punishment for killing the python, or he did it in celebration of his victory. So this leads us into Delphi, which is a very significant place for him. The serpent had an oracle, and the serpent was also said to be able to give prophecies as well. So he was protecting this temple where his oracle was. Once Apollo defeated him, he basically took charge of all of that. And he ended up building his own temple around this. And to get followers, because nobody really knew that he was there at that point, he transformed himself into a dolphin and went into the sea and basically lured these sailors over to him. which is why they call it Delphi, because of dolphins. They come across his temple, they see his name inscribed everywhere. So these sailors start to worship him as their deity. Apollo is known to be over many things, but I'm going to go over some of the main ones that he's associated with, which is healing, music, and light. For his music, he was followed by the Muses, which were considered his worshippers. They would sing his praises all the time. His association with the light and the sun and healing. But arguably, one of his biggest qualities or gifts was the gift of prophecy. And this falls back into the Oracle of Delphi. Now, the Oracle was a woman known as the Pythia. She was a priestess of Apollo who would enter this altered state of consciousness to communicate the prophecies from the god Apollo himself. She was known as his mouthpiece, essentially. She was considered extremely important, very powerful people. They would travel from countries away just to consult with her over different issues, like if they should go to war, different politics, conflicts that they might be having, and just to see what they should do in certain situations before making solid plans or before running for something or any of the sort. She was very well respected and well known. And as you know, Apollo is not just over prophecy, he is also over healing, which he taught medicine to the humans. A lot of his offspring are very heavily associated with medicine and healing. He's over music, dancing, the arts, poetry. The Muses were some of his followers. Just like in the last episode with Dionysus and his Maenads, it was Apollo and his Muses, and they would sing his praises all the time. He also has very heavy associations with the light and the sun itself, and heavy associations with Helios, who was the personification of the sun, and Apollo is the controller of light. So we'll get into that later, but I just wanted to throw that out there. Now, we're going to get into the complicated part with him, which is his lovers. Apollo had many, many lovers. I'm going to go over the main ones, but just know that there are many more, and their stories do run very deep. So the first one I want to talk about is Daphne. She was a nymph who Apollo fell head over heels for, but she didn't want anything to do with him. So to escape his advances, because like father, like son, we all know who his dad is, she ran from him and went to a river where her father was the personification of this river. He was the deity there. Asked him to save her, and to do so, he turned her into the laurel tree. And when Apollo saw this, he was very upset, but he declared the laurel tree one of his symbols. So you will see this tree a lot when looking up different ways he expresses himself or how to honor him. The laurel tree is a big one. Coronus, who was a follower of his sister Artemis, Apollo fell head over heels for her next. And unfortunately, followers of Artemis take a vow of celibacy, so they have to be virgins. In one legend, she was no longer a virgin after this and was killed by Artemis as punishment. Another one of his lovers was Cassandra. She was a Trojan princess who was given this gift of prophecy if she agreed to love him. And once she received this gift, she ended up rejecting Apollo, and in anger, he cursed her to never be believed by anybody, which later comes up. If we ever talk about the Trojan War, she was the one trying to warn everybody about this war, which, by the way, Apollo wanted the Trojans to win, so it kind of like shot himself in the foot with that because nobody believed her, and if they did, there was a possibility that the events could have turned out differently than what they did. So Hyacinthus was one of his male lovers, and they both were deeply in love with each other. I mean, this was one of those fairy tale romances. They both just adored each other. Unfortunately, there was a god, Zephyrus, and he is a wind god. He was also in love with Hyacinthus. And during a game of discus, which is frisbee, between Hyacinthus and Apollo, he pulled a strong wind in the direction of the young man. And when Apollo threw the disc, and mind you, these are metal, like, discs. These aren't little plastic frisbees that they had back then. It killed him after it hit him in the head. And from his blood was growing this flower called a hyacinth. They're actually really pretty, and I've known of them, but I did not know that this was associated with that story specifically. But that became sacred to him after that. As I said, there's many other lovers, but these are the main ones that would be more well known. If you want to look more into his stories, just know they are very tragic and they don't really end well. It's not going to be a happy love story. So I'm going to go over a couple of the children that Apollo fathered, which fathered is a pretty strong word. Some of them he didn't really have anything to do with for the most part. He just kind of existed. So Asclepius was the god of medicine. Orpheus was a very famous musician and poet. Phimone was his daughter. She was also the first priestess of Delphi, and she invented the hexameter verse, which is complicated to explain, but it is basically a poetry verse or a way to write a poem like the Iliad and the Odyssey was written in. And it's not really used in English because different syllables and the way that we pronounce words and everything wouldn't be the same way ancient Greeks spoke. But that was a big thing for her specifically. She invented that. And we're going to get into how he's associated with the sun specifically, because nothing that we talked about previously, other than him being a god of light, really associates him with the sun itself, other than that aspect. So it's kind of interchangeable between a Titan god, Helios, who is, like I said earlier, the personification of the sun, and Apollo, who is in control of the light. So Apollo was said to drive the sun chariot and brings it from one end of the earth to the other every day. It was also said that Helios did this, but Apollo is the later version of this story and switches it up a little bit to show why Helios drives the chariot and why Apollo may or may not later on was their son Phaeton, and he was a demigod. His mother was a human, and he was basically trying to convince a group of his friends that his dad was Apollo. And, for some of these stories, the people immediately believe them and they're like, yeah, this is the son of a deity. Unfortunately, he was not believed. He was just seen as like some kid trying to get attention. So he goes to his father Apollo and asks if he could drive the chariot across the sky one day. Apollo was a bit apprehensive about this, but made him promise not to adjust the reins, just to leave it as is and ride it across the sky one time. And Phaeton agreed to this, but he was too high up in the sky for his friends to see him, so he decided to pull the chariot a bit closer to the earth, so it ended up scorching parts of the earth. In a panic, he pulled the reins up again, which caused the earth to freeze because the sun got too far away. And this is where it said we get our ice caps and our deserts. And it ended up causing a lot of damage on the earth, which Zeus noticed and struck him out of the sky, ending his life. Apollo no longer wanted to ride the chariot, so he handed it over to Helios. This could also be seen the other way around, where Helios was the father of Phaeton and allowed him to drive the chariot. So it's kind of interchangeable. They're very connected to each other as deities. There's another version of this where, as I said, Helios is the personification of the sun itself, and Apollo controls it going across the sky, but they work together to keep a good balance on the earth, making sure that he's far enough away to where he doesn't damage the earth, but also close enough to bring us warmth and light that we need to be able to survive on the planet. So I am going to pass it over to Sarah to share with us the animal associations, astrology associations.
Okay, so for Apollo, the zodiac sign that he is affiliated with is Leo. This is due to the sun, the light, the creativity, radiation, warmth, full of energy, as Apollo is known for with being associated with the light, as Leos are described as confident, generous, warm-hearted, and passionate. They are also ruled by the sun, which goes hand in hand with Apollo. The fun fact about the Leo sign is that the key star in the Regulus system, which is the Leo sign, is the brightest star in any of the constellations, which is really interesting since he's again with the sun, so of course he's gonna have the brightest star in the sky, as he should. We can also see Sagittarius as a zodiac sign for Apollo. They have the bow and arrow, so hunter, and their adventurous spirit and their pursuit of knowledge. So, as a whole, you can go either way, but he leans more towards the Leo just because of the personality traits, the warmth, the sun, the light, everything along those lines. Now, Apollo has a lot of animal representations, and Mickey did say a few of them, but I'm still going to go through the list because it's not extensive, but it's definitely a few. So we're going to start with the swan. So they're very sacred to Apollo. They travel to the so swans are really sacred to him. They travel to the Hyperboreans on the back of one, which is the northern region of the world. So that's how he travels there, which is very interesting. We also have the wolf for the Apollo Lycaeos, again, Greek, we don't speak Greek, which means Apollo of the wolf, and that's the role of the protector and the role of the warrior. So as we heard earlier, one of the animals is a dolphin. Apollo could take the form of it, as Mickey stated, when he dove into the ocean, changed into a dolphin, and led the sailors to the temple of Delphi. And that's where we also hear the Homeric hymn to Apollo, which is, I haven't listened to it, I actually should, because it sounds really interesting. We'll also see the ravens or a crow. They're not interchangeable. They're fully different birds. Ravens are very big. Crows are a little smaller, but they're the same hue of a very, very dark blue or a black. They are Apollo's messengers. So the crows and the ravens, they used to be white, but one of them failed a task. So Apollo chose to punish it by changing its feathers to black and thus making all crows and ravens black, because they would see the color white as from the sun, from the light, and the color black is to the night and anything along those lines. So it's kind of like it was a punishment. Not kind of, it was. So we will also see a deer. Apollo is portrayed as one. Deers were a gift from Cyparissus. So Apollo is also the god of herd animals. Cyparissus was just a human beloved by Apollo. I don't remember off the top of my head if they were lovers, but Apollo was just like, that's my man's or that's my bestie, and there really is no in between. And then we also have the python, which is another animal symbol, as Mickey mentioned earlier. He slew the monstrous serpent at Delphi, which secured the temple, and then created the oracles of Delphi, which were his followers and priestesses and priests and everything along those lines. Last but not least, before we get into some honorable mentions, was the hawk. Now, the hawk is connected to Horus, which is the Egyptian hawk god, and the story of how the hawk became a thing is from a man named, Daedalion. So he had some daughters, and he was a ruler. He was cruel and warlike. His daughter was so beautiful. She was the object of so many men's affection and their desires when she turned 14. Now, mind you, again, this is like back in the day when that was legal, and you lived until 30. Anyway, so she had so many admirers. Her name was Shion. The admirers were not limited to mortal men, unfortunately, as we know. She got attention from Apollo and Hermes. So they were just filled with like lust and love for her. Apollo decided to wait until the nighttime, but Hermes wanted her right then and there. And trigger warning, he took what he wanted when he wanted while she was asleep. And, she fell pregnant with his baby. And then Apollo visited that same night as the guise of an old woman, kind of took what he wanted as well. And then she was pregnant with his baby. So she was pregnant with twins of both of these gods. So they were both vastly different. Autolycus was from Hermes and Philemon was from Apollo. Pronounce his name. Autolycus was a very known he was a master thief, and he was just not a great guy, genuinely. And Philemon was mainly known for his singing voice and how well he was able to lead people. Now, with that being said, we're going to get back to Daedalion because that's their grandfather, and that's the whole point of this story. So, as you know, his daughter had these two kids. They tried to make it seem like she was as beautiful, if not more beautiful, than Artemis, because that's how they portrayed her, as that love the gods and the men that loved her, right? And Artemis did not like that because you cannot compare yourself to the likeness of a god or a goddess. Artemis struck down Shion, just killed her. Daedalion was so distraught by this, he tried to throw himself into her pyre 3 times, but each time he was caught and restrained. And after a fourth time that he was unsuccessful in that jump, because he didn't want to live without his daughter. At that point in time, he was like, you know what, I'm gonna be a better person. I need to be there for my daughter and my grandkids. But because, she wasn't there, he wanted to be like, I'm gonna go be with her on the other side. Like I said, after that fourth time, he ran at an impossible speed through fields, mountains, forests, and he climbed to the top of Mount Parnassus and he jumped to die. And Apollo, upon watching all of this happen, felt really bad for him. Like, he felt an extreme amount of pity. And before Daedalion hit the ground, he transformed him into a hawk so that way he could not fall to the ground. He was able to spread his wings and fly, which is really crazy to me because he didn't want to be around for his daughter. So now whenever we hear, he didn't want to be around without his daughter. So whenever we hear a hawk crying or screeching, that's Daedalion crying and screaming because he no longer has access to his daughter. And so now he's in the embodiment of the rage and strength of hunting birds, which I think is very poetic because, he was a warlike, cruel man. And then he's like, my daughter, miss her. So that one made me tear up a little bit. Anyway, back to our animals that he's associated with. So honorable mentions are mice and griffin. Mice, because Apollo was able to help protect the cities from them. The bubonic plague was still a really big problem. Mice were just a genuine problem because at the time, now mice and rats are very clean animals, but at the time they carried the fleas, they carried the insects, and they carried a lot of the diseases that we saw take out cities, countries, everything. So he would protect people from them. And also griffins. Griffins pulled the chariot that he used to turn the night to the day. And griffins are also associated with wisdom. I think that's really interesting because I love a good griffin. I would love to have a chariot pulled by a griffin. Anyway, the best way to honor Apollo is through the arts, music and poetry mainly, but you can also do theater. Anything artistic related is going to help you a lot. We are also going to want to have some outdoor time in the sun, bask in it. And then that'll also help promote good mental health. He's all about that. Like, if you're out in the sun, everything's going to be positive and have a good outlook. Any offerings would be honey, any type of traditional Greek food, so olives or figs, wine, fruits, cakes, and other foods. A man's a foodie, I guess. I've never worked with him, so I'm gathering my information. And laurels, as we mentioned earlier, because of the nymph that he loved. Feathers, sunstone, citrine, amber, hyacinth, or any type of donation to a hospital or disease research. It could, if you have the monetary ability. If you were to set up an altar for Apollo, we're going to want to use gold, yellow, or white cloth, or all three. We want to have some images of the god himself, crystals that he likes. So again, sunstone, citrine, amber, and some herbs. So hyacinth is a really good one. And in an offering bowl, we can use honey, fruits, or olives. All in all, Apollo's a really cool god. I like his animals because he's got a lot, and it really depends on what you're looking for.
So for this episode, we pulled the Six of Wands for our tarot reading, and this card is associated with success, recognition. It could be self-confidence or leadership. So it can indicate that you are on the right path and you are being led to success. It can also mean that you're taking on a leadership role. If you pulled this in a career context, it can mean like a really good outlook for you and that you're going to get along with these people, or in a new project that you're doing, especially if you're in a team that you're leading. It can be that your self-esteem or your self-confidence is being uplifted and that you're seeing things in a more positive light. The reversed meaning of this card can be maybe you're not achieving what you want and you might be procrastinating some tasks that you need to get done. Maybe you're feeling like you're not being appreciated by others. Maybe you're feeling disconnected or misunderstood. It can also mean that you are losing motivation for something if it's reversed, depending on what context you pull this in. So for a career, maybe it's just lack of meaning, or you're feeling like you're kind of stuck in one place and you're not making any movements upward or forward. And it's just you're staying the same constantly. It can mean that maybe you have a strong connection with other people too, if you pull it upright in a career context, or that you may be getting promoted, or you have a really good outlook on things. In a love context, you may also see this as in a reverse meaning, you might need to be better at communicating your feelings or setting boundaries. And then for an upright meaning, you might be in the right place and the relationship is going really well. And to keep that momentum, you have to keep your motivation up and have a more positive outlook on life and in the situation itself. It could also be telling you to be very mindful of your ego. And if you're bragging about something or anything like that, just be very mindful of that because other people may see it and they might wish on your downfall, which can affect your energy. Just be yourself and you will get to where you need to get. This could also be an indication to celebrate any accomplishments that you've made so far. So, say you just got that promotion or you just got something really good that happened to you. You might be in a new relationship. You might be feeling really good about yourself. Celebrate this joy, celebrate your life and yourself. And yeah, it can indicate that you might be overdoing it a little bit, but also depends on what context you're pulling these cards in and where it falls in your spread. So just keep that in mind as you're interpreting these cards. But it's overall positive. Big changes, but positive changes is essentially what it comes from. And then I'm going to give it over to you for our crystal of the week.
So I'm really loving how our tarot and crystals line up with each episode we do. Now, granted, the crystal is chosen in advance, but the tarot is pulled before we record. So it's really awesome. So the crystal that we chose this week was Sunstone for Apollo. One of the main reasons is Sunstone is associated with Leo as a zodiac sign, but the properties of a sunstone is going to bring joy, optimism, and courage, and it's going to help the person who's using this stone to discover their true selves, inner and outer. It's going to help in relieving stress, clear negative thoughts, and provide deep emotional support in any way that's necessary. It's also going to help with your self-worth, confidence, and optimism, and it'll also shield you from negative energy and psychic attacks. It also can help encourage independence and originality. And like I said, Leo is the zodiac sign it's affiliated with. It's going to help give a Leo a vibrant energy. It's going to also help them promote joy, creativity, and personal power. We know that Leos, like, quote unquote, tend to be super, like, all about me, it's just me, myself, and I type of thing. But sometimes that's a front. This is really going to help them bring that type of thought process to fruition. The best way to cleanse a sunstone is going to be with running water, not salt water, funny enough. Just regular, everyday water. Sunlight, this is not a stone that can be cleansed in moonlight. It kind of goes with the name sunstone. Or selenite, as we know, selenite's a great cleansing stone. So cool thing about sunstone is it's a part of the feldspar family, and the feldspar family is made up of sodium, potassium, calcium, and or barium, and any of those minerals put together can make a feldspar stone, and then any additional minerals that get added is what changes the chemical makeup of said stone. So for sunstone, we're going to have the feldspar, and then we'll have copper or hematite, which is going to give you that red hue. That's going to give you, it's like a glowy, clear, very, like if you think of the sun in your head, not like a drawing of the sun, but like the actual sun in outer space, you're going to get that look to it, which is very interesting. It's so pretty. And it's found in the US, Norway, Sweden, and Australia in the mines. However, these mines are underwater. So you can't just go into a regular mine and hope to find a sunstone. No, you have to go into a mine thousands of feet down in the water and hope that you find it. It's very interesting. And then it just kind of cools because it's underwater. It cools rapidly with the pressure with molten lava. That's how we get that, beautiful color. I haven't used it yet, personally. I use other stones to bring my joy and creativity at the moment, but I can say that if I was to go for the aesthetic of having a sunstone, I would, but that's just me. Mickey, have you ever used sunstone yet?
Back when I was doing a lot of work with pendulums, I had a sunstone pendulum. I think I gave it away to somebody though after I mean, once you kind of use things and you feel like you don't need them any longer, I usually try to pass them on to my friends or somebody who I think would really appreciate it. But I did have one as a pendulum. It is really pretty.
That's so valid. And because whatever energy you imbue a crystal with is going to stay with you. But if you cleanse it and you give it to somebody that you trust, a friend, a family member, a coven member, it's going to do what they are imbuing it to do.
Exactly. And I think the person that I handed it over to, I think they really appreciate it. But I just didn't have a use for it after that point. I don't want to keep things if they're just gonna sit and not be used.
Thank you guys for listening. Let us know in the comments how you used the crystal we showcased today, and if there are any you would like us to talk about in the future. Thank you for coming to our garden. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy our content.